Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the virtual Tuesday morning breakfast forum, Sarah Stevenson Tuesday morning breakfast forum. I am Mary Johnson, the facilitator for today, along with Laura McCletty, Jackie Edwards, Winston Robinson, Steve Johnston, Sharitha Sherrill, and Nathalie McElrath. Our virtual forum runs from 8:30 to 9:30. However, we stay online from 9:45 until 9:45 for additional conversation if you can stay. There's no pressure to stay. We know you're busy. We always begin with a prayer with Miss Saritha. Saritha, take it
Yes.
away.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Let us pray with our heads bowed. May God bless us with a restless discomfort about easy answers, half truths, and superficial relationships, so that we may seek the truth boldly and love deeply within our hearts. May God bless us with holy anger at injustices, oppression, and exploitations of people, so that we may tirelessly work for justice, freedom, and peace among all peoples. May God bless us with the gift of tears to shed with those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation, or the loss of all that they cherish, so that they may reach out to us and we will reach out our hands to them to comfort them and transform their pain into joy. May God bless us with enough foolishness to believe that we can really make a difference in this world. So God bless our country, bless our state, bless our county, bless our city, so that we are all able, with God's grace, to do what others claim cannot be done. In God's Son, Jesus' name, I pray. Let us say together, Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Miss Saritha.
You're welcome.
Okay,
It was a
our
powerful
guest
prayer.
Our guests today are the district attorney candidates. We have our current district attorney, Mr. Spencer Merriweather, and Mr. Tim Emry. I'm not sure if I saw Mr. Emry in. Oh, there he is. Thank you. Okay. Now, following the presentation, we're going to take brief questions that are placed in the chat. We will ask that you mute your devices to eliminate background noises during their presentations. They will give their presentation, and as I said, you will put your questions in the chat, and I will be the one to ask those questions of the candidates. Okay? So, with that being said, we're going to begin with we're going to let each one give a presentation, then we're going to open up for questions. So,
but this is really just a great opportunity to rejoin with the Tuesday Morning Breakfast Forum, which is now appropriately the Sarah Stevenson Forum. And it is appropriate that I come before you again today because, quite frankly, for me, this is where many of policies in my office started, was by coming to you and talking to you about them. And I want to spend the next few minutes telling you how I made good on the promises I made to you 4 years ago. First of all, just to recap, I am Spencer Merriweather, and it is my intention to run for re-election as your district attorney. I am so proud to do so. You know a little bit about my personal history as well, but I want to remind you that, of course, I was born from parents who both were schooled themselves and then taught in segregated schools in Alabama, and it is from them that I learned values of commitment to service. It is from them that I knew that I had to figure out a way through to that commitment to service. Um, and for me, that meant standing up for people's neighborhoods and their families and their children. And that's what we have tried to do since the day I took office. And so in 2017, when I came before this forum and told them that I was going to begin by recreating a special victims team to work with victims of sexual, child, and family trauma, that we would be a trauma-informed unit, and we have done that. I told you at this forum that I would form a violent crimes team that would be dedicated towards the prosecution of violent crimes, to hold those accountable who have committed crimes involving firearms in this community. I told this forum that we would be changing our approach to the way that we deal with bail and what we asked of judges, that we asked them to consider whether someone should remain in custody based on dangerousness and not debt. Of course, I spoke to this forum about the way that we would champion second chances, and we have done that through making sure that youthful offenders and low-level people with low-level criminal histories have an opportunity to get their record clean, so that we could open up opportunities for job and housing and educational opportunities that have been closed to them previously. I'm proud of the fact that we were the first district attorney's office in the state and one of the first in the entire Southeast to take equity seriously within this office and create an entire curriculum for the assistant district attorneys and staff within this office around values of diversity and inclusion. I'm so proud of that work and so recognize how important it is to this community. And of course, within the last couple of years, we have reoriented our approach to drug prosecution by making sure that we are guiding people towards the treatment and recovery that they need for drug addiction, and using that time to prosecute violent crimes in our community, which the devil is. I will tell you that all of these things that we have accomplished over the course of 4 years were designed to make sure that we're establishing trust among this community. I promise you, Justice, that you can trust. And I will tell you that that trust is important because it matters who your district attorney is, because all of the challenges that the district attorney will have to confront cannot be foreseen. Lord knows I did not foresee April 2019 when I would have to arrive at the scene of a UNCC and recognize that there was going to be a mass shooting, and know that we had to bring and administer justice to someone who killed 2 and injured many others. I know that in this place where our community demands of us both an awakening to social justice, as well as confronting all of the issues surrounding violent crime, that it takes a DA that you trust to be able to achieve that balance. And finally, I never in a million years would have thought that we would have our entire justice system grind to a halt because of a pandemic. And it called on the person who was in this position to make sure they were balancing the twin challenges of public health and public safety. And so, based on what we've been able to do, it's the reason why I want another chance for another 4 years to make sure that we're rebuilding our justice system after the pandemic, that we are continuing to move towards transforming our justice system into one that operates more effectively and more fairly, to make sure that we are developing the type of early intervention techniques within our justice system to be sure that people who are suffering from mental health challenges are not languishing in our criminal justice system. You have heard me before speak about the Family Justice Center and how important that is to this community. I spoke at length to this forum about that in the past. And I will tell you, we are a long way from where we were when I first introduced that idea to you 4 years ago. And I'm proud of the fact that we are moving so quickly from development to completion of giving victims and their family the type of support that they need within this community. And certainly, we will continue to take the fight to Raleigh to make sure that they keep their promise to victims of crime within the General Assembly to give us and pay for us to have the 21st century justice system that we deserve. All of these things that I mentioned to you are about not just who your DA is, but really about what kind of tomorrow that you want. And the tomorrow that I want is one that is a school system free of guns. It's one that continues to find ways to be innovative, as we have done over the course of the past 4 years, of making sure that we're advancing safety and justice. It's also making sure that the person who holds this position is not thinking about their own political agenda, but they're thinking about you and thinking about your families and thinking about how you will be protected and how we will be fair to you. I believe that we have done that work over the course of these past 4 years, and I want the chance to continue that work for another 4. And with that said, I'm so happy to answer your questions, so happy to be before you today, and so happy to be running to be your district attorney for another 4 years.
Thank you so much. Okay, we'd like to hear from Mr. Tim Emry.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My apologies. I was on my laptop and I just got bombed out of the meeting. So now I'm on my phone. So hopefully you'll be able to hear me well. Thank you for having me. My name is Tim Emry. I am running for district attorney. I have served as a criminal defense attorney for the past 20 years in Charlotte. This is my community. I started as a public defender, and over the last 10 years, I've had my own practice. I handle pretty much exclusively criminal defense cases in state court. Do not do federal defense. And the one exception right now is I am a part of a team of 10 attorneys who are suing CMPD over their assaults and treatment of peaceful protesters on June 2nd, 2020 in upstate Charlotte in the immediate aftermath of the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. I have a 25-year track record of anti-racist advocacy. My complete bio is on my website, but some of the organizations I'm involved in Charlotte include Race CLT, North Carolina Racial Equity Network, Race Matters for Juvenile Justice, Carolina Youth Coalition. I coached Church League basketball for over a decade, member of Housing Justice Coalition, Reimagining America Project, and a member of the Champions, a subsidiary of the Women's Intercultural Exchange. My career has left me with several key understandings of the what is often referred to as the criminal justice system, what I often refer to as the criminal punishment system. And the first is the criminal justice system is not broken. Sometimes people say it's our broken criminal justice system. It's not broken. It is working exactly as it was intended. And that therein is the problem. The criminal punishment system is rooted in white supremacy and anti-Black racism. And I am running for district attorney because I want to see a transformation from a criminal punishment system to an actual justice system that delivers justice. I believe that we cannot get there by nibbling around the edges, that we need systemic change in order to remedy this disease system. There are 4 key pillars to my campaign. The first pillar is hold police accountable when they break the law. From Danquarius Franklin, Harold Easter, to officers who knowingly destroy evidence and lie, there has been a failure to hold police accountable when they break the law. The policy position, because I'm all about policy, the policy position that I want to institute is the creation of a specialized unit within the district attorney's office, that one of the things they would be charged to do is investigate and prosecute cases of police misconduct and police criminality. The first order of business that unit would do would be to look over old killings with an eye for prosecutions. There is no statute of limitations on felonies in North Carolina. So simply because one prosecutor made a decision not to charge in relation to a killing, that would not be binding on me. The second policy is a large one, and it's to end the mass incarceration policies of the district attorney's office. There's a lot of mass incarceration policies in the district attorney's office, and I only thought I had 5 minutes, but one I want to focus on is the habitual felon unit. Habitual felon is North Carolina's version of a 3 strikes law. 3 strikes laws have been demonstrated empirically across the nation to not be in the interest of public safety. They don't keep us safe. They're horribly expensive, and they're racially applied. North Carolina is no different. What habitual felon does is it greatly amplifies the punishment someone is facing based upon their previous record. An example is, I had a client who was a drug addicted person. So of course he had a bad record. He stole a television from his brother. Now, shouldn't do that, shouldn't steal, certainly not from your family. But he is currently serving a 10.5-year minimum prison sentence in North Carolina, out of Mecklenburg County because of that. Now, I don't care who you are or what you've done or what your record is. No one should go to prison for 10.5 years for stealing a television. And that's the issue as it relates to habitual felon law. Additionally, the district attorney's office has a habitual felon unit. Nearly 90% of the people that the habitual felon unit prosecutes are Black people. This in a county that 33% of our community is made up of Black people. Another Another thing that goes under mass incarceration policies include overcharging and upcharging. A great example of upcharging is I am currently representing a client who is charged with a felony for allegedly shoplifting 3 pairs of socks from Dick's Sporting Goods. 3 pairs of socks in wintertime. That is nonsensical, and that is not a good policy. The policy positions that I would implement as it relates to mass incarceration are multiple, but I want to highlight 2. One is I want to disband the habitual felon unit and pledge to never prosecute anyone as a habitual felon. 2, want to reduce the number of people, the amount of people we send to prison out of Mecklenburg County by 50%. The third pillar of the campaign is promoting racial justice and restorative justice. As we talk about racial justice, it's closely linked to the mass incarceration policies, but it certainly goes beyond that. We have a big problem in this community with pretextual stops. Pretextual stops are more commonly known as racial profiling or driving while black. The reality is that in this city, we know the city is policed in 2 separate ways. It's policed in one way if you live in the Wedge and look like me, and it's policed a different way if you live in the Crescent and are a person that doesn't look like me. In our last, additionally, as we look at racial justice, I want to look at prison numbers. And if I'm noticing the chat, if I've got data on all of these things, I do not say things that there are not data to support. In our last non-COVID year, 2019, again, in a county that is 33% black, of the people Mecklenburg County sent to prison, 82% of those people were black. These disparities are completely unacceptable, and the disparities are not improving. The policy positions as it relates to racial justice, a couple that I want to focus on are, 1, I want to have a default position to reject cases based upon pretextual stops. If there is a traffic stop that creates a criminal charge out of a racial profiling incident, I'm rejecting that case for prosecution. 2 is we want to measure equity. We want to use data and partner with national and local community groups to analyze what is actually happening in the district attorney's office. Find the unacceptable racial biases, find the disparities, and implement aggressive solutions to address those. Restorative justice is a promising way to promote public safety. It actually is one of the best ways to promote public safety and reduce crime reliably. Restorative justice is a victim-centered process. It focuses on accountability and reduces the likelihood of future harm. I always say that's the thing that our system does the least good at. Putting circumstances into place to reduce the likelihood that this person does harm in the future. We know that prison doesn't do that, and as it's currently constituted, probation doesn't do that. Restorative justice can do that and will do that and has done that in other communities. It also is a good mechanism to address trauma, intergenerational trauma, multi-generational trauma, etc. So the policy position there is to embrace adding restorative justice practices for many cases and work with community partners to implement restorative justice practices in the district attorney's office. The 4th pillar of the campaign is the commitment to never seeking the death penalty. The death penalty is one of the most visible symbols of white supremacy in North Carolina. It does not deter crime. There is a long history that we're all familiar with of people wrongfully convicted, sentenced to death, and were later exonerated and being actually innocent. And additionally, although it doesn't happen often in this community, there is one case currently that the district attorney's office is pursuing capitally. And ultimately, it comes down to a moral issue with me. I don't believe the government should be in the business of deciding we are going to try and kill this person. I believe in a higher power that makes those decisions. So the policy position there is quite simple. I will pledge to never seek the death penalty while I'm district attorney. If our neighbors to the north in Virginia have seen the light and can ban the death penalty statewide, until Raleigh can get on board, the least we can do is make a commitment to do so in Mecklenburg County. There's a whole lot more to my policies. The website is Tim4DAFOR spelled out. We put out a video every Wednesday called Policy Wednesday. You can find them all on the website and our social media. And I'd love to talk to people offline. Feel free to contact me. And I look forward to answering questions this morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank both of you for being here with us today. I am really excited to see as many people on as we have today, because as you know, there's much talk about the city council, the county commission, but we don't hear a lot about the DA position, and I think that's extremely important. And thank all of you for being on this morning to hear about it. Okay, so I do have some questions. This one is for Tim Emry, but both of you can answer this. The habitual felon law, oh no, but this is just for Tim Emry, sorry. The habitual felon law that you seek to change is something that can be challenged on the local level, or is that a state law that would require you to petition the North Carolina General Assembly? What can actually be changed locally without petitioning our Republican majority in North Carolina?
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. That's a good question. So my policy positions and the campaign focuses that I've identified, I've thought long and hard about. And the thing about them is they're all things that, with the use of prosecutorial discretion, the prosecutor can implement. Prosecutorial discretion is a very broad and powerful tool. The elected prosecutor is the most powerful lever of power in the criminal punishment system. So yes, as it relates to habitual felon, that's a status offense. So police don't arrest people and charge them with habitual felon. They're arrested and charged with the underlying crime that caused that. So what we do is use our discretion to never indict someone as a habitual felon. To not seek that additional enhancement that meets out some really unfair and nonsensical punishments. We want to address the root causes of criminality, behavior. That's the most reliable way to increase public safety. So we don't need Raleigh to do that. And in fact, it's interesting, if you go and look at the session notes when they implemented habitual felon, they believe that it would be used sparingly. And this district attorney's office has a policy to automatically indict everyone that's a habitual felon as such. Now, they don't always insist on a plea to habitual felon, but they put that stick out there.
Okay, this is for Tim also. How will you explain? Oh, go ahead, Mr. Merriweather.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I just want to say that that while, in fact, everyone who qualifies for the habitual felon prosecution is indicted as an habitual felon, probably about half of those, if not more, are not ultimately convicted as habitual felons, because that allows for the use of discretion. And in fact, what we try to do within that team is consider hold people. And that means whether or not someone is led to their criminal behavior because of addiction, because of other sort of misfortune within their lives, or whether, quite frankly, it's someone who the day they get out of prison is the very next day they're going to commit a crime that threatens the community. And we try to look at, for instance, perhaps it is someone who's committed a felony larceny, and that is what is on the table. But we look at whole people. And so if someone has actually been, the only reason someone has not been convicted of a violent crime or many violent crimes, such as 15 domestic violence crimes, is because that victim was too afraid to show up to court. We might know a little bit more about that defendant and what their actual threat is to the community that is reflected more than just that felony larceny. And we factor that in on how we use that statute. I think that's important. And I'm not the only person who thinks that the way that we use that statute has been a good way. As a matter of fact, the Governor's Task Force on Racial Equity and Criminal Justice, chaired by Associate Justice Anita Earls and Attorney General Josh Stein, have specifically recognized my office, the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office, in the way that we thoughtfully use the discretion when it comes to habitual felon law. So it's my intention to continue to use that discretion. We're talking about, there was a day when you knew that the person who was indicted for habitual felon was going to automatically go to prison. And under my leadership, we have found appropriate circumstances where we are sending that person to treatment and putting that person on probation and putting that person on a road to recovery instead of a prison sentence. I'm proud of that record, and I'd be happy to talk about it more.
Okay, so Mr. Emry, how will you explain to survivors of violent crimes that you will not seek habitual felon status when the North Carolina statute states that upon conviction, one must be sentenced and punished as a habitual felon?
It doesn't say that one must be punished. It says if indicted and found to be of habitual status through the court process. I'll tell you, I've represented hundreds of people on habitual felon charges. Very few of them are violent crimes, and I can probably count on one hand the amount of time a non-prison offer was made in those cases. So to address the question, the interesting thing there is serious violent crime is typically an offense, and I don't mean to get into the weeds here, but it's an offense class higher than an offense than a C felony, and the highest that a habitual felon can escalate something to is a C. So in the case of, say, an attempted murder or assault with deadly weapon, intent to kill, inflict serious injury, those are already punished as, if not more severely than the habitual. So those typically aren't used to enhance the sentence habitually. And if you look at the punishment chart, the numbers are quite large on violent crime. An interesting aside, sometimes people that think the way I do get challenged and say, what about all the murderers and rapes? And that's a serious problem. But less than 12% of the people we send to prison in out of Mecklenburg County are for homicides or sexual assaults. I'm not talking about that 12%. I'm talking about the 88% that we sent to prison for something else. And what chunk of those could an alternative to prison be appropriate? And is prison not appropriate? Because again, we know prison doesn't work. That's, the people that get hammered on the habitual felon are typically not violent felonies that involve other victims. Those sentences mete out severe punishments in and of themselves.
Okay, I have a question for both of you. How do you plan to create and maintain a professional working relationship with CMP?
Do you know how you get there? Okay, see, 85 North.
Somebody needs to be muted.
I think it's remedied. I want to create positive working relationships with everyone, but at the same point in time, I can't sacrifice the need to hold police accountable when they do harm and when they break the law in an effort to maintain a positive and friendly relationship. So sometimes I think prosecutors and police have a symbiotic relationship, and it's really not always that case. They occupy different lanes within a well-functioning justice system, and sometimes that means I have to hold police accountable. Now, I'll always do it professionally. There are people that disagree with me and whatever, but I don't think you're going to find anybody that say, Tim Emry is unethical in his practice of law.
Okay, Spencer.
I think that I have demonstrated in a number of ways, in the ways in which I intend to have a professional relationship with law enforcement, but also a responsible one. And that's what was going through my head when, despite the fact that it went against the culture of our county in bringing in the State Bureau of Investigation to investigate crimes involving officer-involved shootings in this community. There are a number of ways in which we have respectful disagreements with law enforcement. That's part of the job. I do not, one of the first things that when we pick juries in this office, one of the first things that we tell members of the jury is that we are not lawyers for the police. We are lawyers for the state. There are times when the interests of the state so align with the interest of law enforcement, but it's not the same thing. We have different roles and different responsibilities, and I have an understanding with that. Lord knows I have had an opportunity to make decisions on cases that have been directly opposed to the interests and wishes of law enforcement. That's part of the job, and that has been part of the job, not just as an elected official. That was part of the job for the 10 years that I held the position of assistant district attorney as well. So I have some practice in that. But at the same time, this community does expect that at the appropriate time to partner with law enforcement to make sure that we are advancing the interests of public safety. And again, I have demonstrated an ability to do that, and that will continue.
Okay, how will you address, and this can be for both of you, how will you address the criminal case backlog that we have because of COVID-19?
And I'll be happy to answer this one. A lot of that, quite frankly, is we're still working through. We have had some communications with folks in Raleigh to try to get a few more resources here to come up with some creative ways to reduce that backlog. There's no question that we're not going to try our way out of the backlog that's been created after shutting a criminal court system down for 2 years. And so that's going to take some creativity. And we have already begun a lot of that. I alluded to earlier about the reorientation of direction in our office away from certain types of crimes and towards the violent crimes that I know need to be prioritized in this office. And so one of the things that we are looking at is finding ways, particularly on cases that have now got a lot of age on them. We're talking about 2- and 3-year-old cases, to try to find ways for healthy disposal of those cases where we know that a defendant has not reoffended over the course of the last 2 to 3 years. And so that's something that's a work in progress, and I'll be happy to update you as we learn more.
Okay. You want to address, you can answer that, Mr. Emry.
Thanks, Ms. Johnson. Justice delayed is justice denied. There are people who are pleading not guilty, who are being told it is going to be years before your case will be tried. Now, that's a problem for people who are sitting in jail and may in fact be innocent of the crime they're accused of. And it's a big problem for the people who have been harmed and want some resolution in their case. I believe the backlog for jury trials, last I heard, maybe about a year ago, was 800 cases. So I can only imagine it's larger than that. I think that, Mr. Merriweather was dealt a tough hand, but I think that we could have been a little more effective in the use of WebEx, particularly as it relates to misdemeanor cases and processing those via WebEx, and as it relates to felony superior court cases, using WebEx for things like suppression motions. Again, I'm getting too much into the lawyerly speak, but not necessarily full-fledged trials, but things that can resolve cases. And additionally, oftentimes prosecutors are overconfident in their hand. So part of it is taking a more discerning look at the cases in the inventory to say which cases is there not sufficient evidence on, and let's move on those and resolve those quickly, because there's a lot of junk right now. I represent a client who I know that it's not going to go to trial. The DA, when they finally look at it, and when I say the DA, I'm not referencing Spencer, I mean the assigned assistant district attorney on the case, they won't go to trial because they don't have the evidence, because my client didn't do the thing that is accused. But it's been 3+ years. He pled not guilty a year before the pandemic started, and we're still waiting for justice.
Okay. Let's see. Mr. Emry, how will you determine that a person was racially profiled? And Mr. Merriweather, you can also answer that.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think we really need to look at data, and we have data that we can look at that I don't think is being adequately looked at. ncopwatch.org is a great website that shows the disparities in policing within CMPD. So that's a primary basis. Ms. Townsend Ingram also had an interesting question about restorative justice. I know you're asking questions, Ms. Johnson, but I hope we can get to that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mr. Merriweather.
One of the things that is interesting that I've heard today is about a 50% decrease in the number of people sent to prison from this community. What that suggests to me, and what I believe it suggests to you, that if someone has their mind made up about dispositions before they read a single file, and I think that's not how this job should go. It is individual intricacies and facts of a case which should determine outcomes. And so if I'm confronted, if the ADAs in my office are confronted with circumstances where they believe that racial profiling has taken place, not only is that result in the dismissal of that case, but that's something that's going to be taken up directly with the leadership of the law enforcement agency. And one of the things that never gets talked about, there's a couple things you can say about district attorney's office. Either they're not doing what they need to do to uphold, to give a defendant a break, or they're dismissing too many cases. Well, those dismissals, a lot of times, there are a number of reasons for the reasons those cases can be dismissed. And if there is a suggestion that racial profiling is at the center of a case, you best believe that's going to be a case that we're not proceeding on.
Okay, so I'm going to go to restorative justice programs. Most recently, there's been one that has been sponsored by Commissioner Mark Gerald of District 4. Are either one of you a part of any of those programs or knowledgeable about those?
The specific restorative justice program that Commissioner Jarrell wisely has advanced within our county commission has specifically to do with sort of reparative work with land use and other things that have gone on within our county as far as urban renewal and the like. Much of it hasn't specifically addressed things going on within the criminal justice system. There are examples of restorative justice throughout the state as well as throughout the country. Quite frankly, it's my argument that we have been advancing the principles of restorative justice long before it became a cool term to use. It's just a matter of what you call it. One of the challenges that you want to make sure you have is that you administer a restorative justice system that is not dependent upon the individual whims of how a particular victim may feel about a case. Because if someone on the West Side commits a crime and a victim in one case who has enough resources to be able to say, not a big deal, and that person is all of a sudden gets a different break than someone for whom that victim says, no, I want to make sure that person gets put under the jail. Well, if it's all dependent upon what that victim says, that sometimes can not result in an equitable outcome. So that takes some thinking through. But where those issues do not exist, we have been happy and have been more than happy to advance the principles of restorative justice in this office.
Okay, Mr. Emry?
Yeah, so I'm certainly supportive of the efforts by Commissioner Jarrell and other folks. I sat in on some early meetings at the Greenspan Center for Peace and Justice as Dr. Keaton and Commissioner Jarrell worked through that. I guess when I say restorative justice, I'm more using it as a term of art to describe it's a very specific process by which a party who causes harm, a discrete harm, sits in community with the harm party and other parties who are affected by that harm with some facilitation and with some other community engagement. And it's a process by which there's a hearing of the harm cause and an understanding, and then a creation of specific accountability steps that the person who causes harm needs to take. That's a particularized process. Now, we're fortunate, and one of the leaders of restorative justice practices is just up the road at Campbell Law School, and it's been going on in that formalized way that I'm talking about in Durham District Attorney's Office for a number of years. The two books that are the most seminal, I believe, talking about restorative justice practices are Danielle Sarad's Until We Reckon. And I forget the author, but it's a book called The Little Book of Restorative Justice. And it is literally a little book.
Okay, and this is for both of you. For Spencer and then for Emry. Spencer, what is your office currently doing to address victim assistance and alternatives to prison? And then Mr. Emry, what will you do that's different?
One of the things that anybody who's done this for a long period of time, and this is true both on the prosecution side as well as the defense side, is that very often people who come through our criminal justice system as defendants will also come through our criminal justice system as victims of crime as well. And that you need to be able to make sure that you are meeting needs, however it is that someone comes into our system. One of the reasons why you hear me gripe so much about resources for this office is because there hasn't been a recognition of how grave those needs really are. And passing the Victims' Rights Act just a number of years ago, it was important for, for the General Assembly to put those principles in our Constitution. The bad thing is they didn't fund a lick. And the truth is, we do have a number of people within this community who are under-resourced, under-housed, lack job opportunity, have had interactions with the criminal justice system as defendants, and have been made even more vulnerable as victims of crime. And the resources that we have here are not enough. Just the other day, I was talking with some city and county partners about the possibility of, at least talking through the possibility of doing what some other cities do, which is to create a fund to help victims through the period as they wait for their day in court. And I think that is something that still needs to be advanced. One of the reasons why, and one of the ways in which I try to articulate to the prosecutors in my office about how we treat people and why it's so important is not just because it's the right thing to do. It's also because you never know how it is that you're going to be interacting with that person. And if you were unkind, unprofessional, and uncourteous to them as they came in as a criminal defendant, by the time that they are a witness of a crime in a case that you are prosecuting, or God forbid, a victim in that case, you want to make sure that they identify you, if nothing else, as being fair and courteous, as recognizing their humanity. Those are the types of principles that we have tried to put into this office, continue to do so, and certainly will do so over the course of the next 4 years.
Okay, Mr. Emry. And Mr. Emry, also, how would you work with community organizations?
Yeah. I don't necessarily disagree with anything Spencer said there. I agree. Hurt people hurt people. And I think that one of the things that's in short supply in our society is recognizing the basic humanity in everyone. So that goes to the way in which we treat people who we serve. And I think that one of the challenges of the criminal punishment system is for too often it's sold victims this false bill of goods that says by the harsh punishment and the incarceration of the person who did you harm, that's going to provide you closure. And I don't think that really provides closure. I'm not sure that the criminal punishment system is capable of providing closure. If any of the mass incarceration stuff worked, we'd have the safest societies the world's ever seen, because we spend more on police and we spend more on prisons and we lock up more people than any other place in the history of time. Yet we don't. So I think that we need to be smart on crime, not tough on crime. And being part of being smart on crime is servicing victims, and really getting at the root causes and getting at things that can actually help reduce the likelihood that person will do harm in the future. That's what most victims I know want. They don't ever want anyone else to have to go through what they went through. And I think our system doesn't address that. We say we're going to send them to prison, but we know that doesn't work. In regards to the second question about working with community partners, I already have a good relationship with a lot of folks in the community. I trust community partners. I trust community organizations, be it national organizations, be it local organizations, particularly local people on the ground, to have a better sense of what needs to happen than a bunch of guys in a suit in an uptown building, and I really want to engage with community partners. One way to do it is with the restorative justice processes. Partner with community organizations that are interested in getting trained on becoming restorative justice practitioners, and then partnering with them to deliver those services. That's a beginning, but I will always have an open door and an open seat at the table for community organizations to really get at the root of issues and problem solve.
Okay. In response to gun violence in Charlotte, that's been a big issue. Are you prepared to aggressively prosecute violent offenders regardless of race?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the interesting thing is that's what's been happening, and we're exactly where we are. So, yes, and I want to address the root causes, and I want to recognize that prison is not a solution. And that's not to say there aren't people that need to be incapacitated. Let me be very clear there. But a recognition that we're not solving an issue. So that's what I mean when I say smart on crime. All the stuff we've been doing has gotten us exactly to where we are right now. And we know what doesn't work. Do we have the courage to try something different that may seem axiomatic, but actually will work and has been empirically demonstrated to work?
Ms.
Okay.
Johnson,
Mhm.
I want to make sure that I say that where the evidence exists and where there is evidence that we can prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt that someone has committed a crime involving firearms, whether it is shooting indiscriminately into someone's house, killing someone, whether it is shooting indiscriminately in someone's house and scaring them half to death, whether it's sticking a gun in somebody's face and taking something from them. These are circumstances where I believe that victims are right to have an expectation that that person will be held accountable and will be not be in a position to harm them anymore. I'm not running from that idea. I believe that that is a expectation that people are right to have. One of the things we never talk about is the type of trauma that is really inflicted upon people when something like that happens to them. That's not a one-time thing. That's something that stays with them forever. And I believe that the punishment that is meted out by our justice system ought to reflect that.
Okay, this question is for both of you. Of the of the priorities on your platform, which one will you be able to immediately implement, and which one will need the most time to implement?
Well, I believe that everything in our justice system is going to take time. One of the things that why I believe it takes a certain type of person to do this work is because it is interdependent. There are very few things. The only thing that a district attorney can do alone is dismiss a case. That everything else requires some level of working in tandem with other agencies, other people, and that's even within checks and balances. Because I've spoken to you from day one about trauma-informed care, particularly with special victims, and I've talked to you specifically about the need for a family justice center in our community. That is something that I believe needs to be implemented with great haste. But it's also true that at this time, specifically at this time, that we have faced so many issues with a halt to our justice system for 2 years, that we need to be rebuilding confidence and making sure that we are transforming our justice system into one that operates again faster and more effectively and more efficiently to serve victims and to give defendants their day in court as soon as we can. Those things aren't going to happen overnight, but they need to happen, and all of the resources of a DA's office need to be dedicated to it.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, Mr. Emry, did you speak to that?
No, not yet.
Okay,
It's a good question. So as it relates to my policy to disband the habitual felon unit, that can happen right away. That will happen right away in January. As it relates to the policy to reduce the people we sent to prison by half, cut that in half, I'd like to think we could get that done in 1 year. I think more realistically, it's going to take 2 years because there's going to have to be other systems and processes put into place. When it comes to rejecting cases based on pretextual stops, that'll be an immediate policy implementation. Of course, there will be some things to iron out related to that. When it comes to the policy of measuring data and exploring data, the first call I make outside of Charlotte after being sworn in is to the Vera Institute. It's to the Wilson Center up in Durham. It's to the Marshall Project, and to partner with those organizations to study things. We used to partner with the Vera Institute. We don't anymore. I thought that was going to get re-engaged in this administration, but it didn't happen. The Wilson Center in Durham is partnering with the Durham DA's office to study plea bargaining and looking for disparities there. That's something that they would love to partner with Mecklenburg on, but hasn't been reciprocated. That would change. When it comes to embracing the restorative justice practices, we're going to need probably a few months to get people trained on being restorative justice facilitators. When it comes to the pledge to never seek the death penalty, that happens immediately. In the case that's proceeding capitally right now, we're going to put in the paperwork to remove that capital designation. When it comes to creating the specialized unit, I already have someone I have some thoughts about that. And we can implement that right away. It's going to take them some time to get up to speed to evaluate past possible police misconduct and illegal police actions in order to make a decision of where there's a case to be prosecuted. But I expect that first prosecution should be coming within 3 to 6 months of taking over. I think that's a reasonable expectation. I have way more policy positions. All of them can be implemented pretty quickly because they're all things that don't require action of Raleigh, don't require action of city council, etc.
Okay, thank you. We are really getting short on our time, and we have 2 more issues that are very important that I need both of you to speak to. So I'm going to say 2 minutes each on each of these. And we'll start with prosecuting acts of civil disobedience, protesters refusing to leave a public place, etc. Could you speak about that, your position on that? And we'll start with District Attorney.
If it's against the law and there's a way that we can actually gather the evidence, and if the evidence exists to prosecute that case beyond a reasonable doubt, we'll do it. What is often the case is that, particularly at times of unrest, it's kind of difficult to figure out exactly what happened. But we are held to the same standard that we are in any case, which is there a reasonable likelihood that you'll be able to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt at trial? If that does not exist, then we will not proceed in that case. If it does, we will.
Okay, Mr. Emry.
I have a slightly different take. I think the moral duty of every prosecutor in North Carolina, we define proof beyond reasonable doubt as proof that fully satisfies or entirely convinces you of the person's guilt. I think that if a prosecutor isn't fully satisfied or entirely convinced, how can they expect to convince 12 strangers, that being the jurors, of the same thing? So I think at that point in time, they have a duty to dismiss charges. I want a sign in every assistant prosecutor's office or cube that says, what does justice look like in this case? And that doesn't mean putting it in 1 of 2 or 3 boxes. It means thinking about what justice looks like. As it relates to civil disobedience, I'm supportive of dismissing the charges. There are still some that are proceeding. Meanwhile, there hasn't been any accountability for the assaults, the planned assaults by a police department on the evening of June 2nd, 2020.
Okay, the next one is what guidance or policies would you put in place for DAs to address defendants with mental health issues? Mr. Merriweather.
Well, I'll make that quick. Even as we speak, I continue to work with our county officials to try to develop some early intervention policies in this office that I hope we can be able to implement over the course of the next year. Quite frankly, and this is something I'll admit to, we're late on that. And part of the reason we're late on that is just that was something that I had kind of planned for year 3 of my administration. And year 3, as you know, resulted in no one actually coming into the courthouse. And so those assessments are a lot more difficult. As things begin to stabilize in the courthouse, that's something that I want to make sure that I am addressing. A couple things I do want to address before I conclude my remarks. First, there's been a couple of allusions to death penalty cases that exist in my office. And at this moment, there are no cases in which we're proceeding on the death penalty. I also just want to say that there's been some discussion about the Wilson Center. And in fact, my office actually has worked with the Wilson Center. The Wilson Center had some designs to come into this office and try to, look at how we do plea agreements in this office, specifically looking at our habitual felon team. In our early conversations, what they found is they were surprised to know the level of consistency and thoughtfulness that we give to our processes. That's work that I'm certainly open to resuming again once things within our court system are stabilized.
Okay, Mr. Emry.
Yeah, Mr. Merriweather, I mean, this was filed before you took over, but Mr. Atkinson, they filed yes on Rule 24. And in my speaking with the attorney, that has not been rescinded. So
Yep.
I think that's, I'm sorry.
It was in the paper that it has been rescinded. It was in the paper.
When was it rescinded?
At least 3 weeks ago in open court, but actually months before. So
that's great, because I made this pledge in my November announcement to not seek the death penalty. So I'm glad that motivated some positive change. I will say that I'm sorry, Ms. Johnson, what was the question?
Let's see. I'm strolling through here. Let me go find that question. Well, I'll come back to it.
Well, look, Spencer and I have known each other for a long time. I like Spencer. I think he's an honorable person. Are you willing to commit to never seeking the death penalty?
I'm not. I'm never going to get to a point where I'm going to be able to look a mother of someone who's lost a child in the face and tell them that just because I decided that the death penalty didn't work for me, that I was going to neglect my obligation to the law to look at the facts and evidence in every single case and then come up with a reasoned decision. I want to make sure that when I'm staring across from a mother who's lost someone, that I have thoughtfully considered all of the things at my disposal as the law commands me to do. I don't know how I would even begin. And I have been in that situation repeatedly since I've been in office, and I don't know how I would begin to tell that mother or father otherwise.
I appreciate that. Thank you for answering that. And I think this is an issue that reasonable minds can differ. I think you're a reasonable mind. I like to think that I'm a reasonable mind. We'll let the voters decide that. But I just, there's a little distinction there between us, and I fall in line with the rest of the so-called industrialized world who recognizes the problems with the death penalty, and I fall in line with the growing sentiment within the United States that it's not an appropriate remedy. It's not to say we let people out. Life without parole is a very severe punishment. You're caging someone for the rest of their natural life. But I certainly respect your position. I thank you for clarifying that. And I still can't remember. I know Ms. Johnson asked a question, then we got on
the question was about mental health issues.
Oh yes, thank you. Very briefly, mental health. We need to do a better job of addressing the root causes, and mental health is so consistently and persistently an issue. And of course there's resource challenges, but I'll tell you, as a criminal defense attorney, I'm often hesitant to share with the prosecutor that my client suffers from mental health issues, because there are some prosecutors who will use that to say, well, all the more reason to prosecute and criminalize and send this person to prison because he's got a mental health issue and he's dangerous and we don't know what he could do. And I don't think that that's the correct way. And I appreciate Spencer's recognition of that, but we need to move more hastily to addressing root causes, to connecting people to treatment, and not criminalizing mental illness. Let's not criminalize poverty, addiction, or mental illness, because it doesn't get us positive outcomes.
Spencer, do you want to?
Yeah, I don't know an office who looks at a mental health situation and says because they have a mental health issue that we need to send people to prison. We'll try to, quite frankly, look at prison as a last resort. Our hope, and that's the reason why you've heard me say probably 3 times at this point, we are looking for early intervention as a way of grappling with mental health. We want to make sure that conduct doesn't graduate into the most violent behavior. It is true that when there are times where, despite the fact that mental health challenges have evidenced themselves and repeatedly nothing has been done about it, and there has been no desire to get that person matched up with the treatment that they need, that becomes problematic, especially when lives and safety are at risk. And so, but I don't know a single prosecutor in my office who looks at that and says, because someone has a mental health issue, that is all the more reason that they should go to prison. That, from my perspective, is not true.
Okay, let me ask both of you this. What have you done, or what will you do to ensure that you identify and terminate rogue assistant district attorneys that do not uphold the principles and oaths to ensure a fair and just criminal system in Mecklenburg County? Mr. Merriweather.
Sure. I know that probably my prosecutors get sick of me putting my finger in the soup, so to speak, and asking them 1,000 questions. But quite frankly, we are, which is to say, I am the first juror. I'm the first standard that you have to pass. And the only reason that those assistant district attorneys, and this was true for me, the only reason that those assistant district attorneys have any authority whatsoever is because of what the people on this call and the electorate in Mecklenburg County decide to confer in me. And that is where their authority comes from. So it's important for me to always be checking in and always make sure that I'm taking seriously the teaching and training of prosecutors in my office and making sure that they're reflecting those sorts of the values that I know you expect and that certainly I expect. When that does not happen, my commitment has been to this community and will continue to be that I will take it up with those assistant district attorneys. And certainly, if that is if that issue doesn't rectify itself, that's up to and including termination. But my first responsibility is to make sure that I'm engaging in active teaching and training. It's one of the reasons why it's important that the experience that I bring to this particular position and the experience that I bring to this work is so important because I've seen a lot. And I've seen a lot, not just in working in criminal court, but seen a lot working in criminal court as a prosecutor and the types of challenges that people face. And it is my one of the reasons I decided to pursue this job in the first place is to be able to impart that knowledge and that perspective to young people who come into my office.
Okay, Mr. Emry.
Yeah, I know that Spencer doesn't want to believe that that's the case. But there are plenty of prosecutors who do hold mental health issues against accused, and there are plenty of prosecutors who do participate in some really questionable practices. Look, I have observed other prosecutors who have some reform-oriented theories, and I have learned that I cannot allow that. This reforming and bringing equity to this system is too important. I cannot allow it to be undermined by rogue prosecutors. So, although it brings me no joy, I have no hesitancy to say we need to rebuild an office, and we need an office of people who are aligned with the aims and visions. And I want to give most people an opportunity to get on board with that. But if they can't, they're going to have to go somewhere else because it's too important. A lot of nice things have been said today, but the fact remains that nearly 90% of the people that are prosecuted by the habitual felon unit in Mecklenburg County are Black people. It remains that in 2019, of the people we sent to prison out of Mecklenburg County, 82% were Black people. There are big red warning bells and alarms and sirens related to the disparities that Mecklenburg County is producing. And I want to address that. And I want to name it and confront it and address it full hand. And if prosecutors aren't on board with that, then they need to find another line of work.
Okay, I have one more question, and I want to thank all of you for all of these great questions and commentaries that you're putting in the chat. I have one more that I can ask because we are really over 9:30, but since we're so engaged, I would like your permission, both of you, to ask this last question, okay? Okay. How is the DA's office, the judicial system, and the sheriff's office working together to address the overpopulation in the jail? How are you involved in that process? And I'll start with the district attorney.
One of the things that we have done, not well before the latest issues with the Department of Health and Human Services, but going back literally 2018, was jail review between my office as well as other sectors of the court system, and trying to make sure that there weren't, as we see it, as unintended consequences within our system. Now, I said to you earlier, what about release conditions should be based on dangerousness and not debt. And what I mean by that is there is no reason that someone should have a $500 secured bond. What that does, if someone can't get out of custody on a $500 secured bond, we know the reason they can't get out is because they don't have the resources at all to do it. So why give that in the first place? What we have tried to impress upon our judges is to make do you intend to detain this person because you believe that it's unsafe to let them out, or do you intend to let them for them, do you believe that they do not pose a threat to safety? And so getting that question answered, and then looking to see whether that has been administered and then dealing with it appropriately if it hasn't been, has been one of the reasons why we know that the people who largely are in custody within our within the detention center are the folks that we believe the community would want to make sure are in custody. We know that there is a price when you have some of the most dangerous people charged with rape, robbery, and I know that it's been said that there's not a lot of those. When I know that probably of the 900 uh, state inmates that are in the detention center, about 600 of them are charged with those sorts of crimes. And that's important. And they're load out, witnesses go away and don't have any trust or confidence in our justice system at all. And so we have to make sure we're dealing with that. We have taken that same model over the last few weeks and months and tried to make sure that we are being even more intense about reviewing the jail population and more frequent. I was just on a meeting just yesterday with other court officials to talk about how we can institutionalize that review process even further.
Okay, Mr. Emry.
Yeah, so tragically, the woman that just died a few days ago in Mecklenburg County Jail, and let's be clear, people in jail for the most part have only been accused, not convicted of crimes. She had misdemeanors and 2 low-level felony charges. She should not have been in jail. Behind every person that's in jail on something like that is a prosecutor in court who is arguing for a secured bond to keep that person in if they're poor. There are over nearly 100, I don't know the daily count, but it usually fluctuates around 100 people who are in jail only on misdemeanor charges in Mecklenburg County Jail. My policy would be to always consent to unsecured bonds, meaning that person doesn't have to pay to buy their freedom if there's a reasonable likelihood that they would be made some type of probationary or less than offer. So not seeking to keep people locked up who we aren't seeking to send to prison. It seems easy, but it isn't. Right now, the DA's office is seeking a policy to hold people on no bond on some charges, some as low as Class G felonies, no bond. That's a mass incarceration policy. I want to get people out. This jail right now, there are severe safety issues. The health department has made that clear, and we need to act more aggressively and more assertively to reduce that jail population. And I would note that 98% nationally, 98% of people who are released pre-trial do not commit new crimes, do not pick up new charges. So it's not an issue of endangering the public by releasing the overwhelming majority of folks, and we got to reduce it. And that's the policy that I would implement to get that done.
Okay, we have reached the end of our questions, and I want to thank both of you for being with us today.